Focus on Headline. And let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, we have our reporters Kwon So-ah and Shin Se-byuk joining us in the studio. Welcome back to the studio, guys.
Hello, SJ.
Good to see you on a Friday for a change.
Oh, yeah. That's right. So, of course, coming in today last minute, we do thank you for that. Guys, speaking of which, a lot of changes being made on the program because of, let's face it, even with us, the COVID situation hasn't been too good. Nevertheless, let's start off with the latest in COVID-19 related figures here in South Korea. Se-byuk, you have the latest numbers.
So South Korea's new COVID-19 cases hit above 400,000 on Friday, marking the second highest infection reported in a single day. The country reported 407,017 new COVID-19 infections, including 39 from overseas, raising the total caseload to over 8.6 million. The latest tally is a sharp drop from the all-time high of more than 620,000 on Thursday, but the Thursday's count had included some 70,000 omitted cases from the day before. The fast spread of Omicron has pushed up the virus curve in recent weeks, with the number hitting 6 digits in mid-February from 4 digits in late January. So the death toll from COVID-19 came to 11,782, up 301 from Thursday, and the fatality rate now stands at 0.14%. And the number of critically ill patients stood at 1,049, down 110 from the previous day.
Of course, so as the government has predicted since earlier this week, it announced this Friday which social distancing measures citizens have to abide by starting next Monday. And I can't believe 2 weeks have gone by this quickly. But it did decide to ease them just slightly, despite the ongoing Omicron wave. Let's get the details of that.
Sure. The details are actually not many details.
Yeah.
The gist is that social gatherings, there's been a slight change to the number of people who can get together. So the cap had been at 6 and now it's going to be 8. So a maximum of 8 people can get together at, for instance, restaurants or coffee shops, regardless of vaccination status. Now, there has been no change made to the business operation hours at such places. So until 11 p.m., that remains unchanged. And there were actually earlier expectations that there might be an extension to midnight. And Health Minister Kwon Duk-cheol gave the reason for this decision they made, saying it's time to modify the current social distancing scheme, but it's too much of a risk to drastically ease measures, and that considering the Omicron surge and the uncertainty surrounding its peak,
right,
and also the strain on the medical system. Now, Lee Gi-il, a health ministry official, in a later briefing explained further, while last time the operation hours for businesses were extended to 11 p.m. This time, officials aimed to alleviate discomforts of the general public rather than the small business owners in allowing bigger groups to gather. And he also said that the record high of more than 600,000 daily infections just a day ago also played a factor, adding that the nation's virus prevention is in quite a difficult situation. Authorities, meanwhile, note stringent social distancing rules we lived with during the Delta wave are no longer as effective as during the current Omicron wave, stressing the number of daily cases is not equivalent to the nation's managing of the ongoing pandemic. So it's no longer a barometer of success. And as you know, during the Delta variant, their approach earlier was, and not only the Delta variant, but also during the original strain, the focus was more on looking at the daily case counts. So now it's more unfocused on keeping the number of deaths and severe cases down. And in fact, Son Young-nae, another official, said that death rates are falling. And actually, the number of fatalities of per 100,000 people is more favorable and stable when we compare it to countries, other countries abroad.
Yeah, and that's just the thing. I mean, do we look at the fatality in terms of per 100 people, or like the fatality rate, which is like what, 0.1 something percent, or do we look at the whole number, which, you know, goes into the 200s? In that case, I think it's a pretty relatively high number here. But nevertheless, whether or not we have, just slight measures being relaxed, or, more measures being relaxed, the point is we are seeing some of the biggest numbers in cases right now. Let's kind of hear about what your take is on the level of social distancing measures we're going to be seeing on Monday. Let's start off with you, Se-byuk.
Well, I'm not an economy or health expert who knows what kind of impact the increased meeting social cap will bring to our society, whether in economy or quarantine front. But this kind of slight change is something that the government is trying to find some kind of middle ground
balance,
between
yeah.
the public and the government. Well, as health officials say, we have to make this kind of transition because we cannot get back to our old quarantine distancing measures, particularly when vaccination rates are high enough. And to be honest, I think we and the government have done whatever we can have done. So there isn't really much thing that we can do in terms of quarantine measures anymore. But I am not sure whether this is the right timing for the government to push ahead with ease of quarantine measures, because we all know that the peak will come soon, within a week or two, and I just feel like we could have waited a little longer when we can ensure our safety.
Maybe that's why we saw just like a slight easing of measures, because to be honest with you, 6 to 8. It's not too
a big difference.
It really isn't a big difference, to be honest with you. And I always go like, I don't have 8 people to hang out with, and so 6 and 8 doesn't really make a difference, and that's probably their way of going, well, listen, we can't ease the restrictions too much, but let's still ease it slightly so that it's maybe slightly more favorable to the small business owners, maybe, is what I'm seeing. So what about you? I mean, you've been following this for years now. Your take on the level of social distancing measures at this point?
I think the government should have not done anything right now at this time. Just like Taebyuk mentioned, why don't we just wait until the Omicron peak is over? So I think as we all see eye to eye on a number of 6 people gathering and a number of 8 people gathering does not make a big difference.
No.
But just the fact alone that this is an ease could give a false impression to the nation's people. For one, that the Omicron situation is not grave enough, and for another, that maybe the government has kind of given up on its prevention measures. So I think this was not really a good idea to ease the measures even slightly right now and just wait for another 2 weeks, just extend the current measures and not make these little changes at this point. And also because actually recently, after the business operation hour was extended to 11 p.m., some data showed that there was actually not a big change for those business owners themselves. And that is, I think, because people themselves voluntarily are not gathering too much at this point. So yeah, I'm not really sure about the recent decision by the government. And actually, I really liked what one doctor said regarding the gradual loosening of measures right now. And he said that there is a possibility to get those numbers of patients in critical situation and fatalities down. And he regrets that the government is kind of easing the measures right now, saying it's as if there's a fire in the woods and we are fanning 부채질 in Korean. So would you say just fanning?
Yeah, you're fanning the flame, basically
flames,
making the
yes.
flame increase, right?
Exactly, and saying as if we're doing this until there's nothing left to burn. So that is quite a strong wording, but it is what I also believe at this point right now.
Yeah, I go back to what Dr. David Kwok, who's a doctor that we connect with time to time when it comes to COVID-19 related issues. What he said was, I remember a couple of months ago when we started really easing the measures, he said, yeah, you know what, I don't think now is the time because we haven't hit the peak yet. Maybe if we hit the peak and it starts going down from there, then maybe start easing the restrictions. And the only thing that kind of, I'm not a big fan of this statement, to be honest with you. Song Young-nae saying that the death rates are falling, the number of fatalities per 100,000 people is more favorable and stable compared to countries abroad. Now, that's like basically, that's what I used to say when I was a kid. Like when my mom used to go, hey, Chris got 100 on his test. How come you only got 95? And I go, well, Steven got 70. So you can't compare it to other countries. I think overall, we've been doing such a fantastic job that we had to keep up that good job. We can't be comparing to some of the other countries that had high numbers and say we should be okay because they went through it and we can go with it as well. I'm a little bit concerned, to be honest with you, because the fatality rate is high.
Yeah,
Critically ill patients
not
is
the
high.
fatality rate, but the number of
the
fatalities.
number of fatalities,
right?
yes.
Because I also want to mention that the fatality rate is low because we have a much higher number of infections on a daily
exactly.
basis than other countries. But that also is likely because we are testing more than other countries.
Yeah.
And also because earlier this week we started to even use rapid antigen tests to confirm positivity. So that, I believe, is because we have that huge amount of cases is why the fatality rate keeps going down to like 0.1%.
Yeah, I was saying, I feel like Korea is the only country where people keep testing until they find out that they're positive. They go, boop, negative, no. Let me do it again. Negative, no, it's not it. Net positive, right? And so we continue to test ourselves until we're positive, which is why, again, I don't really trust the numbers that are coming out overseas neither, because there's just not testing as much as here in Korea. But nevertheless, whether or not we have seen the peak and we are going to be going to see a decline in the cases, we'll have to find out. I think next week is going to be certainly very crucial here. Moving on here, the Presidential Transition Committee officially kicking off on Friday at the Tongidong office where President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has made his temporary office there. With this, the committee has around 50 days of preparation ahead of taking over the country's top office there. Now, to mark the occasion, President-elect Yoon opened the committee's first meeting. Sebyuk, tell us more about this.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's transition team officially began its duties with a ceremony to put up a formal signboard on Friday. So presiding over the inaugural general meeting of his transition team, Yoon said the general public and national interest must be given priority when conceiving state tasks. While in discussing the pandemic, he urged the team to seek ways to better compensate struggling small businesses, to address challenges in quarantine and healthcare, and to prepare a manual for another potential pandemic in the future. Well, Yoon said how a presidential term will look like in the end is reflected in how it does in the beginning. And according to the spokesperson for the president-elect Kim Moon-jae, the most pressing issue for the transition committee is responding to COVID-19. And chairman of the committee, An Chol-soo, will also be in charge of the measure to fight the pandemic. And Yoon today requested that the plans be focused on two things: medical infrastructure as well as compensating small businesses. And in addition, he said the committee will need to lay the foundation so that during his term, the country can step forward as a leader in the fourth industrial revolution. After lunch with the People Power Party's leadership, he met with former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to seek advice on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and climate change. During the meeting, Ban stressed the importance of the Korea-U.S. alliance, saying that the ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis has taught us several important lessons. And Ban also added self-reliance as key to retaining security. And in terms of North Korea policy, Ban emphasized the importance of following common standards and principles that are shared by the international community. And when it comes to climate change, Ban told Yoon that carbon neutrality must be achieved by 2050 while closely coordinating with the international community.
I remember back then when Ban was actually also not president.
Well, he was a candidate.
Not candidate.
Well,
but
he was. He didn't go as far as
yeah.
being the candidate, right? But he was like being mentioned as a potential presidential candidate, but it didn't go as far as that.
Right.
I do remember that, actually. Good point there.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the incoming Yoon administration plan to move the presidential office out of the Cheongwon compound. I mean, this was something that was talked about all week here, almost as if this is like the biggest thing to do for the upcoming Yoon administration. We have some more concrete forecasts on where the office will be, Soa?
Right. Moving out of Cheongwon is one of the big pledges President-elect Yoon has made, and it looks like the plan is taking more shape now. Either it's going to be this whole government complex in Gwanghwamun, more specifically where the current Foreign Affairs Ministry is, or the Defense Ministry compound in Yongsan, which has recently emerged as an appropriate spot given its benefits in regards to security. Now, Gwanghwamun and Yongsan are both not too far away. They are both kind of downtown Seoul, I would say.
Yeah.
And members of Yoon's transition committee were said to make on-site inspections at both locations this Friday. It's not going to be an easy decision with safety, infrastructure, cost issues to be settled, as well as the public's consensus. Speaking of which, Yoon's spokesperson Kim Moon-jae said at a press briefing earlier this morning that Cheongwon will return to the people before spring flowers wither. With that that confirming that there is practically a zero chance for the next administration to keep its presidential office inside the Cheongwade compound.
It's interesting because, again, this isn't the first time that this idea was put forth. President Moon Jae-in at the early stage of his administration put this idea, but because logistically it just didn't work out, whether or not he's really going to push forward with this is going to be the big question. But again, zero chance, right, that Yoon will move into Cheongwade. That is a pretty solid statement there. Not to mention the Defense Ministry compound emerging again, like Soa said, the most likely site. But still, though, it's still raising security concerns because we have the unstable security situation domestically and abroad. So, Sebyuk, you have more on this.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has reportedly settled on setting up his presidential office in the Ministry of National Defense building in Seoul's Yongsan district and is already making relevant arrangements with the Defense Ministry scheduled to vacate its main building by the end of the month. But amid unstable security situations, both domestically and abroad, due to North Korea's missile launches and the war in Ukraine, such rushed preparations for Yoon's move into the Defense Ministry building are prompting concerns that the process will result in gaps in South Korea's military readiness. Well, reporting by the Hangyeore has found that departments in the Defense Ministry and the Joint Chief of Staffs and the Defense Acquisition Program Administration, or DAPA, that will be affected by the relocation have been notified of the specifics of the move, such as location and scheduling. If the presidential office is relocated to the main building of the Ministry of National Defense, offices within the Defense Ministry, the JCS, and the DAPA will have to be relocated in turn. And Yoon is pushing to move the presidential office out of Cheongwade in the name of open communication with the citizenry, but public access to the Ministry of National Defense building area is limited anyways due to military security concerns. So many people are rather skeptical about Yongsan as the appropriate location for communication with the people. Also, others have said that the leadership of the Defense Ministry and the Joint Chief of Staffs relocating its offices successfully at a similar time period may result in gaps in communication and command that can create problems in South Korea's military readiness posture.
Now, before we move on here and talk about whether or not we agree that it should be moved or not, right now it seems like during the transition period here. Remember, there's a lot of things that we've always talked about how the next administration is very, very crucial because there's a large number of things that they need to tackle. Number one has to be COVID-19, okay? Whether or not we see a downtick in the cases, even if we start seeing improving numbers moving forward here, the recovery process and how we're going to deal it post-pandemic is the other thing. We have North Korea-related issues right now. There are signs that, I still think they did test the ICBM, even though they said it's for, reconnaissance satellite. There's also reports saying that maybe they're going to start testing nuclear weapons and so forth. So Korea Peninsula-related issues right now. But it does seem like the current Yoon administration, the upcoming Yoon administration, their big focus right now seems to be number one on the top of the priority is moving to Cheongwade. Now, there's a lot of people saying, a lot of citizens going, is that really the most important thing at this point? Do you guys have any thoughts on this and why this is such a big deal? So let's start off with you. Do you understand it?
Do I understand?
Do you understand the significance of having to actually move the Cheongwade?
I don't think it should be like the top priority out of what the next administration should do. But I know why they're focusing on it right now is because the administration will kick off in May. So before anything else, I guess they want to fulfill this moving out of Cheongwade because it was their pledge and there is not a lot of time. And I think if they once really settle down, that's when they can also start with all the other agenda. But actually, honestly, even during the Moon Jae-in administration and also when Yoon Suk-yeol made the pledge, I wasn't really that sure whether this is really has to be done because why can't the president be at the presidential office of Cheongwade is what I actually thought. I mean, I get it that the next president wants to be kind of on the same eye level with the nation's people, and that's why I think it's more of a symbolic move, but it takes a lot of efforts to,
it's not
settle
an
down.
easy.
And,
To be honest with you, it's not an easy thing where you can do this in a matter of 2 months. To be honest with you, think about it. I mean, you're talking about the presidential office that's been used for decades right now, and to have Sebia.
Well, I think what they are trying to do is rather than actually moving the Blue House, I think they are more focused on 정권 교체.
Change of the administration.
Yeah,
But the change of administration doesn't mean that you're changing the building.
Because 청와대 is the symbol of the administration, the current power. So President-elect Yoon has always his presidential race slogan was 정권 교체. So I think he's trying to make some kind of a symbolic move.
Is it just a show then?
I don't think it's because of the 정권 교체, because, I mean, all other presidents before were inside the building. I mean, in 청와대, and it was also President Moon's wish actually to move out.
I don't think it's gonna be a show. I think President-elect Yoon will move the presidential office anyways, but I think he is trying to show that he is totally different from the old administrations.
Well, again,
so that he actually fulfills what he has pledged for.
I mean, if you're going to try to do everything that the other administration didn't do, I mean, there's a long list of stuff. But, it's just, to me personally, right, you were saying that the Blue House symbolizes a single administration. I don't think that. I think the Blue House just symbolizes
the president of South Korea.
Yeah, the presidential office. That's it. That's where the president resides. That's where his family resides. That's what I think.
Yeah, I can't imagine, for instance, a U.S. president moving out of the White House.
Yeah, like, for example, it's the Blue House. Okay, the blue was a representative color of the Democratic Party. I'm going to change it into a red house. Like, it doesn't happen that way. It just doesn't, to be honest with you. And that's the reason why I think there's a lot of people, Korean citizens, who are going, really, is this the most important thing to talk about right now? But again, he's trying to show that he's trying to do something that no one's ever done before. If that's the case, I mean, there's a number of things that other presidents haven't been able to do, and which I think will improve things better. So going into it, where would you like to see the presidential office be? I guess that's the question. So let's start off with you. Should it stay put?
Out of the two places that are currently being discussed, I would rather than have it in Gwanghwamun. At the complex.
Gwanghwamun. I mean, it's a very busy area.
That's why there are concerns about security issues. But I think because it is a crowded area and many people work in that area and go back and forth, it would be more it would be like the essence of what they are actually trying to do with moving out of the 청와대.
To be honest with you, if they're going to do this, I don't think this is something that a single administration be doing. If indeed a number of other former presidents and other incoming candidates and president-elects, they all believe that they want to move the 청와대 in itself, right? I don't know what they're going to, and if they feel like Yongsan is a very good place for a number of reasons, like how the Yongsan military camp is basically, virtually doesn't exist anymore. They've moved down to where is it? They moved to Pyeongtaek. There's vast land there. I don't know, build a new presidential office there. Maybe that's what, it's not something you can do in 2 months is what I want to say. It's something that needs to be planned in years and years, and it might take even a decade, to be honest with you. I just don't think this should be the priority at this time. Sebyuk, you were saying that Gwanghwamun was a option that you also like as well, along with Soa.
Yeah, because just simply Gwanghwamun is the symbol of the country's vibrant democracy. So I think Gwanghwamun would be a better place for a new presidential office, particularly when President-elect Yoon said that he's trying to facilitate more of a communication between the public, between the people and the government. So I think Gwanghwamun would be a better place.
I think I should move to Anyang. I live there. It's a pretty good neighborhood. But anyways.
Okay.
Nevertheless, someone else once said that the 청와대 is always open, but from a different perspective, I guess. This is the outgoing President Moon Jae-in calling for talks with the president-elect Yoon Suk-yeol. Of course, we talked about earlier this week that the meeting that they were supposed to have was canceled for unknown reasons at this time. So let's talk more about this.
Right. We did talk about this a few days ago, but but which appeared to be due to insufficient fine-tuning between the two sides before the meeting. But now President Moon Jae-in was quoted by the presidential office of Cheongwade as requesting a one-on-one at the earliest time possible. And that's when he said the door of Cheongwade is always open. And his spokesperson Park Kyung-mi said the president added any prior coordination for the meeting may not be necessary. So it looks like he seeks open and candid talks with the president-elect, so less of formality, meaning not limited to specific agenda. Earlier, it was speculated that the two sides had failed to narrow differences on their stance towards a potential pardon of former President Lee Myung-bak, who is imprisoned over corruption charges. Now, Yoon's spokesperson, meanwhile, in response, released a message that said Moon and Yoon are communicating closely based on mutual trust. So maybe we will see the two sides get together for a lunch meeting or not. Maybe next week is just my personal prediction.
Yeah.
And briefly, a recent survey revealed that what the nation's people expect from President-elect Yoon, according to a poll by Gallup Korea this Friday, integration, national unity, and cooperation is what citizens want from the next administration. Now, cooperation in Korean, they sect 협치, so it would be rather political cooperation, so among all political parties. And that's based on a little over 1,000 respondents who were to respond freely on their wishes for the next president. And this response accounted for 11%.
It's going to be tough to see any kind of cooperation amongst the parties involved because, number one, I mean, we're talking about one of the most split election results, almost 50-50. Not to mention, you might be seeing the PPP going into the presidential office, but the National Assembly, of course, being dominated by the DP. And there's going to be a lot of clashes. It is going to be very tough out there. Let's move on to our different issue this time. The South Korean Finance Ministry, in its recent economic assessment report, noted that external economic uncertainties, both home and abroad, may harm the recovery momentum here in the country. Let's get more on this, Hae-byuk.
The finance ministry said Friday that the South Korean economy has extended its recovery momentum on the back of robust exports, but the fast spread of the Omicron variant is feared to constrain the recovery of private spending. Well, in its monthly Green Book, the ministry said external economic uncertainties also heightened as volatility in raw material prices and market fluctuations amplified due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the report showed sales at department stores and card spending increased last month on year, but their growth slowed down from January amid the Omicron wave. And the Ukraine conflict and ensuring global sanctions against Russia drove up already high oil prices, putting upward pressure on inflation. South Korea's consumer prices grew 3.7% on year in February, marking the fifth straight month that inflation has grown more than 3% amid surging energy costs, and South Korea heavily relies on imports for most of its energy needs. A ministry official said if hikes in oil prices continue throughout the year 2022, it could serve as a downward risk for economic growth. And he said inflation growth will be also high in March as demand pull price pressure from the economic recovery has mounted amid soaring energy prices. And in fact, Moody's Investor Service downgraded the South Korea's economic outlook, and this is something that Soa will cover next.
Yeah,
I will.
Right?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, so there are dim forecasts in terms of economic growth globally as well as domestically as well. It's kind of affected by the Ukraine crisis here. So tell us more about this.
Sure. A global credit rating agency, Moody's Investor Service, cut South Korea's growth outlook for 2022 to 2.7% from its earlier outlook of 3%. The biggest reason is the global economic impact due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine that's triggering inflation, financial disruption, as well as security threats. South Korea's own forecast from its central bank stands at 3%, but it's, I think, likely that it too will slash it later. The economic fallout, of course, is predicted all across the world, with Moody's also having lowered its growth outlook of the G20 from 4.3 to 3.6%, and the US to 3.7%, and Eurozones to 2.8%. 8%. And Russia's economy is forecasted to shrink 7% this year and 3% next year, down from 2% and 1.5%, which was before the invasion. Now, a separate forecast by the OECD, meanwhile, said the crisis could reduce more than a percentage point of global growth this year, and that global prices could be pushed up by around 2.5%, citing a severe economic shock of uncertain duration and magnitude.
Also, many banks around the world, of course, including South Korean banks, having a really extremely difficult time processing trade financing related payments due to the global sanctions imposed, of course, on Russia. We did have a chance to talk about this with an expert yesterday. To help local banks and their units in Russia, the South Korean government is set to open temporary settlement lines here. So, Sebyeok, tell us more about this.
The South Korean government plans to open temporary settlement lines between local banks and their units in Russia. And the announcement made on Friday came as part of efforts to help local firms facing difficulties in trade financing due to global sanctions against Russia. According to the Financial Services Commission, the government plans to support swift trade financing related payments for local companies, as Uri Bank and Hana Bank are set to open ad hoc settlement accounts for their affiliates in Russia. The move is aimed at minimizing the use of global intermediary banks, as such lenders have tried to avoid transactions with Russia due to sanctions causing major disruptions in handling of money payments. But the new settlement lines will not be allowed to be used for transactions with Russian banks or entities that are on the list of global sanctions against Moscow. And there will also be financial support for South Korean nationals in Russia for business purposes, as well as for students. So the government will also provide loans for families of South Korean people working in Russia to help cover living expenses amid disruptions in wire transfers. And for South Korean residents and students in Russia, the government has raised the limit on the amount of emergency money that can be transferred through diplomatic missions abroad, increasing it from $3,000 to $8,000.
You know, I've never spent a whole bunch of money on, duty-free purchases before. Usually buy maybe like a whiskey or something like that. It cost no more than maybe $300. That was the maximum that I ever spent. But apparently there was a limit. I didn't know because I never approached the limit. Apparently.
And it's because you're not a Korean national.
Oh,
either way.
Is that really okay?
Because the story that we're going to talk about is about Korean nationals.
Okay, I had no idea. Yeah, because apparently individual spenders in Korea, for them, the government has lifted a limit on duty-free items for the outbound travelers.
Right. So the maximum amount Korean nationals could spend for duty-free purchases departing the country was $5,000, but that's been scrapped starting today. The Ministry of Economy and Finance said this is to boost consumer spending and revitalize the duty-free industry, and along with that, support the travel industry that's been hit by the ongoing pandemic. A duty on goods worth over $600 those stays, which has to be paid upon return to the country. Now, this limit, meanwhile, has been lifted for the first time since it was implemented in 1979. So it is good news once we do get to travel around if the COVID-19 situation does improve here and abroad. And I just want to read out one message that I see by J-Man, who said, "Why not SJ president in the future?"
Number one, because I'm not a Korean citizen, and then also I can't run for U.S. presidency because I wasn't born there. I'm a naturalized American citizen, so I'm not.
TMI.
I can't. I'm not welcomed in both countries to run for presidency, so that's not going to happen.
Yeah, but it's great to hear that you don't spend too much for duty free.
I was just gonna say this news, this 5,000 limit being lifted, that's bad news for all the husbands out there. I'm just gonna put it at that. I would just want to end this note also. Sebyeok, you've been with Arirang Radio for how long?
Arirang Radio for over 3.5 years.
3.5 years. Today is Sebyeok's final day here at Arirang Radio because she is now going to be a reporter for the Arirang News team.
Right. Congratulations.
Thank you. You guys can find me on TV now.
Yeah.
And so, but I mean, we will, Soa and I, we both work downstairs, and so we'll definitely be seeing you.
Right.
But
we'll see you guys around.
Yeah, congratulations. Best of luck to you. And thank you very much for all your hard work throughout the 3.5 years you were in Arirang Radio.
Thank you. It was
I'm so glad to have been here with you today on your last day.
Yeah.
That's right. And All right. All right. Well, nevertheless, 새벽, thank you. Soa, thank you as well. Have a safe weekend. And of course, we'll see Soa next week. And 새벽, I'll see you downstairs.
Thank you.
See you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.